Can I ask you about inflation? Because it strikes me, yes, you are in a position where your politics, you may have to wait to 2025, but you have this issue with inflation that it went up to 26%, as you said, and now it's down to 13% a month. One issue for you is that if you do things like release capital controls, if you get rid of those subsidies, then inflation may go up in the short term. You may be doing the right thing in the long term, but inflation would go up in the short term. And inflation is the thing that you have promised Argentines you will keep low. Is that another reason for delaying?
I don't see why opening up the markets. Actually, what generates inflation is the fact that I haven't yet fully cleansed the central bank. That's the point. If I haven't cleaned up the balance sheets of the central bank, it means that I am not solvent.
If you got rid of controls, there would be a rush to get dollars, inflation would go up. Everyone, I think, would say that.
Well, that's not necessarily what's going on, right? But the thing is this. In order to do that, I first need to clean up the central bank balance sheets. It's important to understand this because when you've got the central bank bankrupt, in a situation in which the monetary liabilities exceed the assets held by the central bank, that is corrected through a higher price level so that you dilute your monetary liabilities. The more bankrupt you are, so to speak, the long-term price level is higher. Therefore, given today's price level, the link between those two prices is the implicit inflation rate. As you rebuild the solvency of the central bank, which is what we're doing, consider that the money base has remained virtually unchanged ever since we took office. But still, and despite the put options and the interest-bearing liabilities, what we inherited from the previous government, and after having bought almost $12 billion, what we have sterilized through the purchase of the BOPREAL, and as regards the fiscal surplus, the money base hasn't changed. So we are cleaning up the balance sheets of the central bank, and in so doing, the long-term price level shrinks because we are shrinking the nominal scale in the economy, and the slope is reduced and the inflation rate comes down. This is why it is so important to clean up the balance sheets of the central bank to get rid of that pressure. Once we achieve that and are able to undertake the financial reform in order for there no longer to be the possibility of issuing rediscounting, the financial reform actually has to move towards a free banking system integrated with the capital markets so that there are no runs and all the imbalances are cleaned up through prices. In that context, if you also have your public accounts, government accounts in order, and you don't use the central bank to finance deficit, and if you also lift the currency restrictions, well, the first thing you need to do is clean up the central bank balance sheets. Once we've done that, there's the anti-issuing law. One very key attribute of which is that this will make it a crime against humanity and not time-barred if you issue money. It may well be the case that once we leave office, someone may come along and want to change that. They may do that, but then someone else might come back and lock them up in prison for doing that.
These might all be very admirable reforms, but at the moment, if you're an Argentine living here at the moment, there is short-term pain in the same way as there was with Margaret Thatcher, with all the people who you admire. And I just looked at the statistics. They're quite frightening. The average salary in Argentina is at its lowest level since 2003. 57% of Argentines live in poverty. Consumer spending dropped 23% in February. So far, the interesting thing is your support has stayed high at 50%. But do you accept that there is a time limit on how much pain Argentines can take to take these reforms?
The first thing is, the way we see it, there has been a cultural change in Argentina. And most Argentines have understood that the solution is not populism. Today, wages are miserable, not through our own fault. That is due to 20 years of populism. When you take the average wage of Argentines back in the 1990s and update it to today's currency, that would be $3,000.